welcome to Ask the TA, a periodic segment on HCAT where viewers can send questions for the town administrator and other town representatives to answer for the benefit of all Holliston stakeholders. This is our 4th episode, and I'll introduce my guest after I read the question from an HCAT viewer. What is the projected timeline of a potential wastewater solution for downtown businesses, and when will the town residents and businesses be able to decide on a path forward from this ongoing feasibility study? To answer that question, I'm joined by Facilities Manager James Keast. James, thank you for joining me. Let's review from the beginning of the process.
Well, thank you for having me. Look forward to talking about this. So a lot of people don't realize that we have actual wastewater treatment plant in town. It's located on 100 Linden Street. And that plant's designed to take effluent, which is basically the liquid waste from the schools, the Woodland Street School Complex, and treat that and then discharge it into the ground. That plant is capable physically of treating up to 45,000 gallons of effluent a day. The DEP, which monitors and regulates how much water we can discharge into the ground, has limited that to 32,000 gallons per day. But currently, the schools only discharge an average about 10,000 gallons a day, which means there's a lot of excess capacity at that plant. And that then drove a conversation relative to, hey, can we leverage that excess capacity by possibly bringing in additional sewage from the downtown business district?
Great. And so Mass DEP, as you mentioned, is the Department of Environmental Protection at the state level.
Yes.
Great.
Yes. So this is a layout of the current facility at the Woodland Street School campus. So this is Woodland Street here. DiMagella softball field is here. The Adams baseball field is here. Miller and Placentino schools are here. And then, of course, the Robert Adams Middle School is here. The plant is this tiny building back here in the corner.
Sure.
Like I said, that plant takes the effluent from all of the 3 schools. The solids actually remain in tanks at the school buildings. And then the liquids are pumped to this plant, treated, and then discharged into 2 leaching fields. They're also called SASs, soil absorption systems, but and for lack of a better word, it's a leaching field. There's Adams West drain field here and Adams East, and this is very large. It takes basically the entire grass area as well as part of where second base is on the baseball field. That's one leaching field, and the second is down here past the Placentino School, and it's basically underneath the soccer field that's there.
Great. And just as a point of emphasis here, if people are visiting it, downtown would be down here. This is the Holliston Police Station here.
So as I said, that plant has excess capacity, so we wanted to commission a feasibility study to do basically 2 things. One, the plant's over 20 years old. It needs to get updated. The DEP did reach out to us saying that the plant does need to be updated in terms of meeting permit requirements. But we also want to understand is what would be involved in terms of connecting downtown to that plant. So the ARPA steering group and the select board voted back in January of 2022 to allocate funding to this study for those two components. We went through the procurement process. Lombardo Associates Incorporated was awarded the contract in March of 2022. And since that time, they've been very busy and have generated 2 reports regarding this project, both related to the modernization of the plant as well as connecting downtown. And those can be seen on the town website. You can see here. If you go under the select board tab, and then you go into the 21-22 project studies, the information would be in that.
Great. Just before you continue too, you mentioned the ARPA steering group. So ARPA is the American Recovery Plan Act, in which the town received $4.4 million. A major focus of ARPA from the federal level on through the state to cities and towns is water and wastewater improvements, capital improvements.
That's correct.
And so obviously this project from the very beginning was always sort of within the spirit of ARPA and made a lot of sense. So it's sort of been on your mind from the beginning of that process.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has. So both of these reports, as I said, are on the website. Just to give some highlights, the first report was issued in June. And the report basically identified what we expected was the plant needs to be modernized. It needs to be updated to meet the DEP compliance requirements. We also wanted to understand the actual flow that's going into that plant from the schools, because we need to understand the total capacity. So we need to know, obviously the plant needs to, regardless if we connect downtown or not, still needs to service the schools. We need to understand at a very high level, or a high level of detail, what that flow is. So Lombardo & Associates conducted a data review of the water that actually goes into those buildings, and then compared that to the water going out of the buildings. Also at that time, the SASs, which again is a soil absorption system, which is a fancy way of saying leaching field, were inspected. They literally took cameras down each one of the lines and looked for damage or plugs and whatnot. And the good news is all of the leaching fields are in great condition.
Great.
Also, from the June report, they looked at the village commercial area, and I'll show you on a slide in a second what that area is. But they identified 129 parcels that are in that area, and they went through and tried to identify the flow that would be coming out of those parcels. So they looked at whether it's a house and how many bedrooms. They went into the Board of Health files for all of these individual systems that are in this village commercial area. And they also looked at the water meter readings from all of these locations. And they were able to use that to identify how much additional flow would this village commercial area be transmitting to the plant. Also highlighted were that additional groundwater monitoring wells need to be installed at the school site. And this is to allow, I mean, envision this. So we're taking all this water, up to now currently 10,000 gallons a day, and putting it into the ground. And we need to understand how that water then trickles out through the ground and what impact that may have on the surrounding area in terms of raising or lowering the water table. And the way that's done is through these monitoring wells that are throughout the site. So since that time, another report came out in November of 2022, and the initial estimates are very encouraging for bringing in downtown. So if we take the flow that's currently being used or being discharged through the individual septic systems in the village commercial area, that's about 30,000 gallons per day. And if we take the high level from the schools, average is about 10, but let's take a peak of 15, and we add that together, that gets us to the 45, which the plant can handle. But if we end up sewering downtown, we want to be able to expand the sewage capacity. So if a restaurant decides to move in to one of the spaces downtown, that's very water intensive. They're going to increase the flow. So we want to look as to the flows, what they would look like if the downtown area had a number of businesses that could use the sewage. So we added another 40,000 gallons of water to the plant, which gives us a targeted flow of 85,000 gallons per day.
Right, and this is all, again, based on feasibility, understanding that, if this were to be a service potentially provided to the downtown area, that you could expect to see potential changes over time.
Yes.
So you need to incorporate those as well.
Yes, absolutely. And the other good news is that the school property is quite large, and if you remember from that previous slide that showed the layout of where the existing leaching fields are, there is a vacant lot where the old flag school used to be. Mm-hmm. That would make a great leaching field. And then there's the softball field, the DiMagella field, that could also be used with a leaching field, much like the Adams baseball field. It's, you can still use the field as intended, but the ground beneath it would be used to disperse the groundwater.
And would that prohibit anything in the future from being used on the flag property, or would that not necessarily impact the future use?
That would not, unless a building were to go on there, and foundation and those types of things, that would be impacted.
So something to consider.
Something to consider, exactly. But if we were to add those additional leaching field capacity, we could exceed 100,000 gallons per day out through that plant, which means that we could expand if we decide to expand beyond the village commercial to treat that waste.
Right, and so this is obviously engineering an environmental feasibility and cost is coming within this project as well that we expect to be seeing some numbers. I know Pia Lombardo had presented to the select board, but we expect obviously to get much more involved in that as we go.
Right. Well, one last critical point in this process, and what we started in sort of the latter half of 2022, was proactively engaging with the Mass DEP. Because none of this can move forward without their issuing of basically what's called a groundwater discharge permit. Our discussions with them about what we're proposing to do are very encouraging. They do not see anything at the moment that seems to be a red flag, but of course they want to see the additional data, which we're going to gather from these groundwater monitoring wells and these borings to truly understand, if we now start putting 100,000 gallons a day into the ground, what that will mean for the surrounding area.
Right. And so I know you have this map coming up next, so before you get into it from the feasibility study, I would just mention a couple things in relation to what you just said. So one, this is the Village Commercial District area, which is defined by our zoning within town. We did engage the state with a LRRP report, which I'm going to just start naming all these acronyms. So that was Local Rapid Response Planning, which came from DHCD, which is the Department of Housing and Community Development at the state level, where they provided us with technical assistance, consulting services free of cost to us, who came and looked at ways to improve our Village Commercial District area. That report touched on wastewater treatment being a potential major improvement for that area. Additionally, we've been talking through our 9 Green Street process with Mass DEP to clear up what had previously been done on that site before the town took it for taxes. And so we know that Mass DEP would be interested in potentially a solution for our downtown area, because anytime you have densely populated septic systems, it can create groundwater issues. And so we do have a body of water that actually flows through this area, which is the Chicken Brook. And so Mass DEP, I think, always was potentially a hurdle to jump here, because we're talking about scaling up a wastewater treatment plant, and yet there's also obviously environmental benefits to potentially doing that for other areas. So I don't mean to cut you off there, but I just wanted to add that caveat, is that we've had a number of people look at our Village Commercial District area. We know that we'd love to make improvements to Central Street, which is a spine that connects Blair Square, which is going to be going under a redevelopment, to our downtown area, which is going to be going through a significant development at 9 Green Street for parking that will invigorate that area, which obviously have all come under your purview as well. But really, this is looking holistically. A wastewater solution would be, a game changer potentially in this area.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, great points. So some people may ask, what is village commercial? And this is, as you said, defined from a zoning perspective. If you look at this map here, this is Washington Street here. This is Green Street, Hollis, Charles Street, Central Street, and Exchange Street. So you can see the Village Commercial, looks at this entire area that's shaded in the tan color.
So Blair Square, downtown.
Yes.
Yep. And so this was extended for this reason, and this was done, within, the last 10 years. So, zoning is looked at not on an annual basis, but, the town has put effort into this. And so this is a defined area, Village Commercial. By going through the LRRP process of the state, we had to provide them with one zoned area, and so it was the Village Commercial District. We have other other areas in town that are commercial. Think Rossini's Corner, with a number of different businesses in that area. But we had to give them one defined area for that, and so Wastewater Solutions in this particular instance, unlike 20 years ago that looked more holistically at the entire town, this is a much more narrow scope for this study.
Absolutely, yes.
You have another map here as well.
So this is just very, very preliminary. This was done in the past couple months. There are a number of options to convey the wastewater from the 129 parcels, if all choose to connect, to the plant. One of the options involves keeping a septic tank on site at those properties, and then taking the liquid, the effluent, from them and then pumping it to the plant. There are also other options where you can put like a grinder pump. Those things still need to be determined. But in general, whatever comes out of these properties needs to get conveyed to the plant. So there'll be basically main trunks of piping. And when you think of a sewer pipe, some people think of these massive diameter pipes. That's not the way the system's going to work. It's going to be what's called a low pressure system. So, some of the main trunks will only be, 2-3 inches in diameter, which means that they can be laid into the street or even through yards much more easily than trying to, fit a 20-inch pipe in the middle of a street that's full of other utilities and things like that. But this is generally the way the piping will work. You can see the dashed line is proposed pressure sewer, and that's all these lines through here. If anyone's been in this area, the general low area is over here, basically where the fire station is. The thought would be is to use gravity as much as possible to bring everything to a one central spot and then pump it to the plant. That would then go out through main pressure lines along basically Railroad Street and then off to the plant. And again, you can see individual connections to the various properties. The green represents a gravity flow. That's one option. The other option is a small little pump on site at that house, and then push that into the main trunk heading off to the plant.
Right, so you're mentioning a few options. I think it's important to sort of step back here for a second. We're going to get into the timeline, which is essentially the genesis of the question and why we're here. A number of things will impact the options that we're talking about, right? Cost is obviously a huge one, not just capital investment in the beginning, but also the ongoing maintenance, right? So you mentioned gravity. It obviously costs less over time to use gravity to move water than it would to use pumps. And I think, through the LRRP process at a very high level, they engaged a third party named Beta who looked at the path of least resistance, right? Just having one pump station using gravity. Otherwise, that may not be the best result for the entire area. So all of those options are being looked at with, it's sort of 3D chess, right? Yeah. Cost goes into it in the short term and the long term. What makes sense for the actual businesses, which is going to require Lombardo Associates in the town to have a lot of feedback from that area, what businesses are looking for, property owners are looking for, and those types of things. So why don't we get into sort of the next steps here as we're going along and everything that you've done so far to date.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said in the beginning, this feasibility study had two paths. One was modernization of the existing plant that needs to happen regardless if we connect downtown or not. And of course, the second phase is looking at the feasibility of connecting downtown to the plant. Regarding specifically the modernization of the plant is 20 years old. No one in town has the expertise to identify what piece of equipment needs to be changed, what really needs to happen from an operational standpoint. Lombardo Associates has that ability and knowledge, and they came through and identified several areas for improvement, totaling $450,000. Back in fall town meeting, a portion of that funding was approved through Article 22, the $200,000. And then most recently, the ARPA Steering Committee, as well as the Select Board, approved an additional appropriation out of those ARPA funds that you talked about of $250,000 so that we can then start this project in modernizing that plant.
So let me just stop there because I'm going to name SCADA, but I actually can't fully list out that acronym. But SCADA is essentially the brains of any of these plants. And so 20 years ago when this plant was created, that was probably the very beginning of SCADA. And so there is not a SCADA system in our plant right now. But all of our water treatment plants, right on the other side of the aisle here, and most towns have a water and a sewer bill. Right. We don't have sewer, so we don't see that. Most residents just get a water bill. Water treatment plants within this town, which we have multiple, all use SCADA, right? So this is really more bringing our wastewater treatment plant up to the same speed. It's the brains of the system. It's what allows it to be monitored remotely. It's allowed to be actually operated remotely. And that will, in the long run, be the best possible outcome for this plant. And SCADA is a scalable technology, too. So we want it in the system, whether it's just to take wastewater from the schools or we want it in the plant if the wastewater treatment plant is taking downtown and the schools.
Right,
so
exactly.
It makes sense in either of these outcomes, and it's something that is obviously what was identified by Lombardo in the first update to the Select Board.
That's correct. That's correct. And if you go on the next slide, you see here is basically a list of the items that would happen. There's some physical changes in terms of the flow of the way the effluent goes through the plant, piping in terms of adding various chemicals to the treatment process, how the liquids that come in are mixed. It's an anoxic mixing chamber, is a large chamber outside of the building in the ground that needs to get readjusted. And then a number of automated, part of the SCADA system, automated data collection equipment tools, pH meters, flow meters. All these things are necessary to keep the plant in check. Right now, it requires someone to be there on a daily basis, monitoring the flow, manually adjusting the knobs and dials to get everything dialed in so that we can ensure that what's being discharged into the ground is compliant to the DEP requirements and obviously safe for the environment.
Which is a service cost that we pay to a third-party vendor, on an annual basis, and is a budgetary impact. So, theoretically, having the SCADA, rather than an alarm that calls a physical person to come, can be potentially diagnostics done off-site.
Right, and self-correct.
Right. Great.
Okay, next slide. So to get back to the question that the viewer asked, what's the timeline of all this? So if we look into FY23 or into calendar year 23, the goal is to have the plant modernization completed. We want to finalize the sewer design, right? We talked about the various types of systems that can be used. We really need to lock in on what's the most economical and viable in terms of conveying the sewage, the effluent from downtown to the plant. We also need Lombardo Associates to engage with the potential users of the system, need to understand what their views are, what's their willingness to connect. I mean, this is all factors into the economics of it. And then, of course, as we talked about, we need to start the DEP permitting process. It's a lengthy process, likely take over a year. We need to start kicking that off and getting the wheels in that in motion. In 2024, the thought is that we're going to establish a sewer district in town. That would utilize some sort of enterprise fund, which we use on the water department side and the various other groups in town. We need to understand what that customer base is going to look like, because a huge factor is the economics to see if this is viable. We need to further finalize the DEP permitting process. We need to generate design plans. I mean, we have that one concept showing, okay, we're going to have a gravity pipe coming out of the house, but we need to know at each of these locations what's involved. So when a contractor comes with a digging machine or a ditch witch type device to run a pressure line, that they know what they need that needs to get done. And so all those details need to be worked out, put on an actual plan, these big plan documents, that can then be used to bid out for a contractor to actually do the work.
And the reason that you have the bid project by the end of 2024, calendar year 2024, is currently tied to the ARPA deadlines as defined by the federal government. And so, as I mentioned before, the town has its own ARPA funding, which the ARPA steering group has been tasked with making recommendations to the select board on. There are also ARPA dollars which the town has received that have gone through the state. And actually, speaking of SCADA, we used some of the state's ARPA funding to redo and upgrade all of our SCADA at all of our water treatment plants on the water side. And that was about $600,000 that we were awarded of state ARPA funding. Additionally, there's a number of opportunities to receive ARPA funding directly from the federal government, in addition to our own dollars. And so all of those dollars have this deadline that are tied to the end of 2024, and it needs to be obligated, meaning that we are under contract with somebody. That allows us to spend the money outside of calendar year 2024, but that needs to be in place. And so I think that is probably the most urgent deadline that we see, because quite frankly, federal and state dollars entering the equation here changes the economics to a point where the viability, it may hinge on the ability for us to get federal or state dollars.
That's right.
And so with that, I think, we are progressing with what we can control. Lombardo Associates, with their discussion with the Select Board, is aware of those deadlines related to ARPA, the federal and the state dollars. And I think the answer of what would be able to be bid by the end of calendar year 2024 is going to require the businesses in that area to have feedback. Town meeting will have an opportunity, most likely, to be weighing in, because a sewer district and an enterprise fund is set up through town meeting. And then really the dollars that we would be able to potentially get from the federal state government may determine whether or not this is an economically viable project.
Right. Right.
Great.
Absolutely.
And then should all of that line up, which, I think that what we've seen is that wastewater projects are a major component of ARPA. Mm-hmm. This is a major initiative from the federal and state government to have water and wastewater solutions. If those things come to fruition, and I feel like we're, through your hard work and Lombardo Associates lining this up properly, then I think to get back to the original question, as we mentioned, what does that look like for an end user in Holliston?
Basically, hopefully by the end of calendar year 2026, flow from downtown would be coming into the plant. There would be a phased-in approach. I mean, the main, and we call them main, sewer lines would be laid first, and then the connections to that line would be made over a period of time within, basically 24 to 26. And that there are a number of factors that may impact that in terms of what may happen in the street or not on the street, the actual resident or business that does or does not want to connect. But the main lines would go in certainly first, and then all the other parcels would then connect at that point throughout the next 2 years.
Great. So I think if I'm a business in the downtown area following along with this, I should expect to be hearing the request for input sometime in 2023. Yep. First quarter most likely through March, and that really getting into the nuts and bolts of what theoretically is feasible, getting feedback from businesses is really the next step here as Lombardo Associates continues to move ahead with modernizing that plant, which we want to do whether or not we move forward with scaling up the plant.
That's correct. Downtown. Correct. Yeah, I would suspect that a number of the businesses or residents that could potentially connect to this will want to know the cost, right? I mean, that's the bottom dollar. So the economic side of this needs to be figured out sooner than later, for sure.
Right. And so again, that really hinges on the type of system and those types of things.
Exactly.
And we won't know necessarily the federal and state dollars that we may be able to get for this project to offset or defray the cost right up front, but we'll know what the total cost is hopefully once we design a system that we think is the right one for the end users. And then we would also use that information to go try to get the federal and state dollars to offset the costs.
That's correct.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to this conversation before we wrap it up?
That's it. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, yeah. So thank you to my guest, the Facilities Manager James Keast, for being with me today. And thank you all for watching Ask the TA on HCAT. We hope you found it informative. If you have any questions that you'd like answered in a future segment, please email us at the address on the screen below. Thank you very much.